better than your currency. Splurging millions, buying houses like Monopoly. Fucking 9 to 5, man, the money is a joke to me. Buying cryptocurrency, my money in the privacy. I make it rain dollars, they watch me disappear. I'm so fly, man, I'ma need some land again.
Hey guys and girls, welcome to this week's episode of the B.Invested with Birchy podcast. I'm your host Nathan Birch, and this is a show unraveling the truth to the facade of the 21st century when our ex in the matrix and waking up to motherfucking reality. Guys, today I'm going to talk about building wealth, intergenerational wealth it is, and the misconception, like there's a lot of people getting into property for the first time out there, and I think it's important that we look into first home buyers and is the first home buyers grant really worth it? What are the benefits from it? And having a deep dive into should we be taking that first home in a grant? Is it really worth it? Is it what it's cracked up to be? And all that. So let's just jump straight in and look at what is the first home in a grant. So going back many years ago, I think it was the Howard government introduced the first home in a grant in around 2001 to help boost up the property market. And back then, it was a very different sort of package than what it is today. When it first started, pretty much every single property out there you could get a first home in a grant for, and it was just a $7,000 grant. So if you bought a property for $50,000, you'd get $7,000. If you bought a property for $1 million, you'd get $7,000. And over the years, it's been chopped apart, changed, pushed up and whatnot. At one point, it went to $14,000. I think it was around 2009 in the GFC. And it's evolved and changed from there. So every state now is different. There's different sort of packages around first home in a grant. The biggest one that's out there now is the stamp duty. So if you're buying a property in New South Wales, they've just upped it. It's around 700 grand, 800 grand worth of property value. If you're buying a property under that, you don't have to pay stamp duty. If you're buying it up to a couple hundred grand higher, then you're paying a reduced amount of stamp duty than what you would normally pay. That's good. If you're spending $500,000 on a property, 800 grand on a property, then you'd be paying stamp duty, let's say 3%, that might be 10, 15 grand. So that is a big saving out there and something that shouldn't be shied away from. However, when we look at the bigger picture, when you're buying a first home, if you're taking advantage of that first home in a grant, what are some of the other pitfalls? So a lot of the grants that are around there nowadays are very different than what they used to be. What the new grants are for is to help obviously boost our economy. So the government's giving you an incentive to buy a property or to build a property. And when you're buying a brand new property, then you're contributing to the expansion of our country. So to build that new property, you need to employ trades, plumbers, electricians, and all that sort of stuff. So a lot of the grants and packages, sometimes there's like a 10 grand home in a grant or a builder's grant of $20,000. There's some grants out there which are pretty good, very attractive. Like obviously if you're buying a property and you're spending $1 million on it, and you're getting free stamp duty, you're getting grants of 10, 20 grand for building a house, it all adds up. And it's very good to look at that. But I think where a lot of people get distracted and get stuck, and the biggest thing that I've seen with people that want to build intergenerational wealth, they've bought a property and they're like, hey Birchy, we've just bought a property a year ago, 2 years ago, first home in a grant, got that. The house is built. Now we want to get investing and we want to start buying properties. But we've been to the bank and they've said, hey, we can't borrow anymore. And that's the biggest trap just there. And what I mean by that is not that it's not good to take advantage of the opportunity of the first home in a grant, but I want to look at the flip side of it and what can you do otherwise. So if you go and buy a property, let's say that you're living with your parents, let's say that you're renting or whatever. If you don't really want to buy that house as your dream home, and generally when you're buying your first home, it's not going to be your forever home anyway. But if you're buying that property just to take advantage of that grant, you could actually be snookering yourself and putting yourself into a debt prison, which you could get stuck into for many years. And the way I look at it is, if let's say you go to buy a property for $500,000, you can save your stamp duty, save yourself $5,000, $10,000, $15,000, whatever. If you're going to leave that property vacant, and when you're claiming a first owner grant, you shouldn't be with the intention of renting it out later. You should be buying it to live in. So I don't want to, blur the lines around there, because obviously probably some goody two-shoes listening to this and saying, hey, Birchy's saying live in it for 6 months and rent it out. But just to assume that someone did do that, because there's a lot of people out there that do that sort of stuff. If you buy a property for $500,000, you save yourself 10 grand on stamp duty, whatever, and then you go and leave it vacant for 6 months, then you go and rent that property out. What happens at that period of time is you've left that property of 500 grand without an income stream. If it's renting for $400 a week, $400 a week times 26 weeks, which is a half a year, is more than the $10,000. So you've just lost revenue coming in to pay for your mortgage because you've left your property vacant. So, trying to outsmart the system isn't always what it's cracked up to be, because you could be hurting yourself in other ways. But most importantly, the biggest part where I see people get trapped, if you're buying a property, right? Generally, if you're buying a brand new property off the plan, I'd say 97% of the time when people buy a property that's brand new, off the plan, never been lived and all that sort of stuff, there's generally, it's like buying a brand new car. There's a premium for buying that property. So you're buying that property, which is new. The developers are paying to the salesperson or whoever it is. Like, a lot of people, there's a lot of wolves in sheep's clothing out there that are out there to pretend, or they act as a financial, guru or a property guru. I see them every day. The ads pop up in my social media, Instagram, Facebook, whatever. And, there's always this next guru, and you can see him walking around a new estate, a cool car, whatever. And they're saying, you could be wealthy too. We'll show you how to get started, blah, blah. Those people that are selling those properties to you, they're getting paid a 50 grand, a 30 grand, a 50 grand, 80 grand, even up to $100,000 commission, right? So let's just draw the line there, right? If you're not, like, for example, at B.Invested, which is my investment firm for those of you that don't, follow my other business channels and whatnot, I was one of Australia's first buyers agents out here 15 years ago. People are like, Birchy, why do you charge, for buying a property? And it's like, well, you're paying for independent specialist advice that's going to help you save money and, build wealth into that asset. There's a lot of people out there, like, people say sometimes, I've been to this other company and they don't charge anything. I'm going to take their advice, right? It's okay, you take their advice and see who's paying. Because if you're not paying for something, you are the product. So there's a lot of these companies that will sell you a brand new property off the plane. Basically, every property that's brand new out there, someone's making a big cut out of it, right? There's the glossy brochures and all that sort of stuff. As I said, 97% of new properties that are sold, they come with someone getting a big backhanded commission on somewhere along the line. So looking at it from that perspective, I'll make a disclaimer on that. Unless you are going and specifically finding a block of land that's below market value and getting a builder to build an asset for you, which is below market value, and then you're project managing your process along the way. But even then, it's got a lot of buyer beware around that. So looking at that perspective, right, if you are getting the biggest incentive, most of these first home buyers are more aligned with, oh yes, I better go and buy a brand new one instead of a second-hand property to get myself the extra $20,000, which it might be an attractive thing at the start, but then you're going to have to spend an extra 200, 300, 400 grand on that property. And what you're doing is you're pushing yourself to get into that property, but you're also spending and utilizing and maximizing your serviceability. So what happens is when you go and buy a property, let's say spending $1 million on it, and you're going to live in it, that means that you have to get up every day. You have to pay that mortgage. If you don't keep getting up to go to work or to your business or whatever to go and earn money to pay that mortgage, then that property is not going to get paid for, and then you're going to get yourself into a lot of trouble. So off the back of that, you look at that and you go, okay, $1 million worth of debt. How does that affect my future borrowing capacity when it comes down to servicing? Because the bank's now holding you 100% liable for that debt because it's your principal place of residence. And if you go rent out that property, you've got $1 million you've paid for it. When you go to the bank and you'll go to the property manager, rent it out, you might get yourself $500 a week, $600 a week, $700 a week. Let's say you get $1,000 a week. $1,000 a week won't even pay your mortgage, right? So the rental return is not great enough to be able to compensate the expenditures going out due to the such large high buy-in price. So the way I like to flip it around, and if I was buying my first property again today, and I did this many years ago when I bought my first property, like I didn't take advantage of it because I wanted to build an investment portfolio. And I'll explain how I got into my dream house. And I've talked about it on a previous podcast, I'm sure about it, of how I got into my principal place of residence for the first time, the second time, and the third time. It was all leveraging and using my asset base to get there. So if you were to go to buy a house for $1 million, you can save yourself, 10 grand on stamp duty, 20 grand on the first home to buy, first home to grant, whatever. If you get that, but then you're stuck. What are you going to do for property number 2, 3, 4, 5? You're stuck in that mortgage for 30 years. So if you're in that position, you then got to work out, okay, do I need to sell that property off, or do I need to get another job? Do I need to work harder? What do I need to do to be able to move on to building my wealth via, passive income and all that sort of stuff? So I actually remember vividly when I bought my first house and I moved into it, my first principal place of residence. It was actually a newspaper, and it was like front page of a newspaper, and it said, it was a Mount Druitt newspaper, and it said the Donald Trump of Mount Druitt, right? For those of you that aren't in Sydney, that it's like the rough area of Sydney, or very rough back in the day. And before everyone hated Donald Trump, they had me on the front page saying it was Donald Trump because they had like 100 plus properties. And I thought it was cool because I had that in a box, and I thought to myself, I'm going to keep all these newspapers and news articles because it was pretty mainstream media back in the day, and just for something fun for future generations or whatever to look at and go, oh, Dad, Pop, whatever wasn't boring as what he seems now. So I remember looking at that paper and I was like, shit. Here I'm on the front page of the newspaper, hundreds of properties, and I'm just moving into my first principal place of residence. And the way I looked at it at the time and throughout the whole process, if I was to take out $1 million worth of debt or $1 million purchase to buy a principal place of residence, that, A, as I said beforehand, would fall back on me. But B, I could have 5 properties at $200,000 per week. And let's just make up some assumptions here, right? Let's say I'm on $100,000 a year income. Let's say I'm a worker on $100,000 a year income. I bought myself a house. It's going to be tough, paying off that mortgage for starters. But secondly, I've just got 100 grand income and I've got my mortgage. If I went and bought 5 properties for 200 grand a piece and they're rent for 300, 350 a week, that means I've now got let's say for $350 a week times 5. That's about $1,750 per week worth of income. That's about $90,000 a year worth of income. So I could take the option of buying my first house for $1 million with 100 grand income, try and pay that off for the next 30 years. Good luck to me. Or I could sit here and go, okay, I've got no principal place of residence, but I've got 5 investment properties and 5 sets of rents. And if one of those tenants don't pay rent, I've only got 4 sets of rents, but still, instead of having 90 grand a year rental income, I might only have 75 grand a year rental income, right? But the biggest benefit of that is that my risk is minimized. If I needed to sell one of those properties off, I could. If it went from 200,000 to 400,000, I could sell it off, keep 4 properties, and have $200,000 cash sitting there in my bank, and there's a 20% deposit for my $1 million house to live in. And most importantly, is when the bank looks at me to go and do another move, they're looking at option 1 or scenario 1, which is a person that's got $1 million house with mortgage with a 100 grand income, versus someone with 100 grand income with $1 million worth of 5 properties, but they've also got the extra $90,000 a year rent. So they're no longer on $100,000 income, they're on $190,000 income, so they've got double the income of the first scenario. And it's that you need to keep the bank happy, so they'll keep opening up and rolling out the red carpet for you. And I think in that situation, a lot of people get stuck, and they're caught up on saving $5 over here instead of working out how they're going to make their next $1 million. So you need to look at what your priorities are. If you don't have clarity with a strategy, with a plan, all that, then you're going to get caught up in should I save first home in a grant, should I do this, should I do that? You need to make sure that you're taking the right move at that time. And I'm not saying to take one strategy over another. Do as you wish. Whatever decision you make does not change my life at all. Doesn't change the bed I sleep in or anything that I do. Doesn't matter what you do, what business you do with my business. None of it changes my life. You need to do what's right for you. But I think 99% of people out there, they just go, oh wow, first time in a grant, let's go take that. And it's the trap. It's the Venus flytrap. It's the essence to suck you into it, to trap you in there. And it's it's a trap of life. It's a trap of life that people get stuck into. So I look at when I bought my first principal place of residence, which, as I said beforehand, I was looking at those newspapers and I had a laugh to myself, put the newspapers in a box, and they're around somewhere in my current house somewhere, in boxes or that. But it was looking at that. I remember when I moved into my house, it was a 1.1, let's say $1.2 million purchase for the exercise here. Interest rates were about 8.5% at the time. And I thought to myself, I bought it with a 6-month settlement. I sold my first house that I ever bought, just to show to everyone, hey, I'm not emotionally attached to anything. I don't care what I have to sell. And I just thought it was, the right time to sell that property. And in hindsight, when I talk to people, no one ever calls me up and says, hey, Birch, I'm so happy I sold a property 20 years ago. I made 200 grand. I bought it for 200. It's worth 400. Sold it, made 200 grand. Thanks a lot. They're happy on the day, but when they come back, it's like, shit, that thing's worth 800 grand sort of thing. So that thing has probably gone up another 300 grand, 400 grand over the years. But the house that I bought to live in has gone up from 1.2 to about 5 mil in that period of time anyway. So it is what it is. But you're looking at that property. So I sold my first house to buy that. So it's cool. Got the deposit all sorted there. And then I had a bit of an awakening one night. I was sitting there, it was probably like 3 months after I bought it. I was like, fuck, like things are good. I've got cash flow, all that sort of stuff. What happens if something went wrong? What is my backup plan? And I was like, the mortgage was like 960 grand roughly at the time, 80% of the 1.2. And I thought to myself, what happens if I'm in trouble and I have to rent it out? So the 960 grand at 8% or whatever, 7%, 8%, it was like it was about 80 grand a year worth of negative cash flow. If I rented the property, so it's about $1,600 a week. If I rented out that property, the property would be bringing in about $500-600 a week at the time. So I would be negative $1,000 a week thereabouts. And I'm like, shit, if I'm in so much trouble, I need to rent out my principal place of residence, then, $1,000 a week would be a lot to me. So I thought, okay, well, what options do I have? And it was as the Sydney market was taking off in the last cycle. That's how long ago it was now. It was like, 10 years ago, 12 years ago, something like that. And I thought about it, and I just sent my property managers some emails, and I started by saying, hey, I need to put the rent up over here, $20. This one here, I think we can push it up $30. And I ended up putting about 30 rents of mine by about $20-30 each. And I ended up getting about $800 a week extra rent from, going through my portfolio. And I felt pretty comfortable at that time because I was like, now my investment portfolio is paying for my lifestyle. And I look at it now, and those rents have probably gone up by $150-200 each on top of that, right? So it's it's a great time to be alive, and inflation's certainly been a great blessing on that front. Even though it hurts us on other side, there's always a opportunity and a cost to something. So looking at it, the inflation of those rents has been very, very important. And the second property I bought was a principal place of residence. I got into in a bit of a different way. The third one is probably the most important one to talk about. That was one that I bought like a year ago. It was like $4 million roughly. And I just wondered when, should I going to buy this house? I bought it. And I was like, okay, I put on a 6-month settlement. How am I going to pay for it? So I just looked there. Most people would be like, oh, well, how are we going to get a loan? How are we going to go do this? Whatever the case may be. And I sat there, and what I did is I just looked at my portfolio, and I was like, I've got properties here that I bought 10, 15, 20 years ago now, and I need to have a nice house to live in. I've lived in nice houses, but I need to have a really nice house to live in. So I sold 5 properties, and one of those properties I bought, it was actually a bulk deal that I bought for my investors in Noosa actually, going back 10 years ago, and we paid like about 350 grand per property. And I think I bought about 20 of them. And I had logged online. I just went through my whole portfolio and thinking, what's the most growth that I've had? Sometimes when I look at properties when I have to sell them or make a decision to sell something, I'll sit there and be like, okay, is this like overcooked at the moment, right? And I looked at this one, I'm like, shit, I can get $1.2 million for this thing. So I looked at the bank, and I'm like, I owe 190 grand or something for it. So I owe next to nothing on it. It started paying itself down for the last 10, 15 years. And that property I ended up getting $1 million in my pocket for. So there's a quarter of the property paid for. And look at the properties I was buying in the Gold Coast. And going back 10 years ago, people in the Gold Coast were like, people were saying, why are you buying in the Gold Coast, Birchy? Why would you buy here for? The market's been declining in value, etc., etc. It's not such a great idea. But I bought there, and stuff that I was buying for 150, 200, 220, 230 had gone up to 500, 600, 700 grand. So I sold off a few of them. And I got into my house with basically no debt attached to it. And I looked at it and I was like, shit, those decisions that I made 10 years prior, I've never been into any of these properties. I've never stepped a foot inside of those properties. I've just held them. The rent covers themselves and all that. And I'm like, well, they've served their purpose. And it was only recently I was actually talking to someone, and I was driving back from one of the motels that I'm renovating, and I was sitting there thinking about the size of it, thinking about the cash flow, thinking about those things that are going to happen. And I was like, hang on a second. And I was talking about just, I don't know, buying their house. It was like, this is a conversation with someone, a bit of a consultancy call. And I thought about my own house, and I was like, if someone was to save up $4 million, right? I remember in the early days, I had the opportunity to go buy a house for like, 800,000, or I could buy, when I first started buying properties, I could buy a house for 800 or 700 grand, which would have been a nice principal place of residence, like just a middle class family area, like an infill suburb type thing, not anything grandeur, not a mansion, not a 20 acres or anything like that. And I would never have been happy there. It's not an ideal home. It's not a lifestyle property, nothing like that. But I remember sitting there thinking, I could have one house for 800 grand, or I could have 10 properties at 200 grand and get to $2 million. And if the market doubled on 2 million, that 2 million would turn to 4, or the 800 would turn to 700, 800 would turn to 1.5 mil type thing. So I look at it and I was thinking, if I had to save up $4 million, how much would it take me to save that up? If someone was to earn 200 grand a year, 250K a year with very humble lifestyle, and was able to save $50,000 a year, to save $4 million, that would take 80 years with no expenses to save it, right? So in order to get there, are you going to get into your dream house? If you're not buying your first home as your dream home, and no one's buying their first house as their dream house, well, very rarely, should you be looking at something a little bit different? And I guess that brings it back down to, if you're not buying your first home and you're thinking about buying your first home today to live in, we'll be thinking, okay, everybody's position is different. Are you single? Do you have kids? Do you have a family? Whatever the case may be, do you have your parents living with you? What's the house going to do for you? What is the big overall strategy? There is like 50 different ways there to, make the thing stack up for you. So I guess the important part is working out where you are in your life. If you're a first home buyer, if you've got a child, or like an adult child, I mean by that, someone that's thinking that that's a first home buyer, maybe share them the video or the podcast, and have them have a listen to this as a bit of an alternative scenario. Because when people, like, the pressure's on, get a first home and a grant, get a first home and a grant, get a first home and a grant, go get the first home and a grant. It's like, well, taking those grants isn't really the best move on the playing field, in my opinion. I think that there's a lot of things people leave out. So I think it's important to have a goal, because when you're buying a property, spending $1 million on a new house, or more than that, a lot of people are spending more than that nowadays, that's a big trap. There's a big fucking chain and ball around your ankles. So if I'm taking on $1 million worth of debt, I want someone else to be paying for that. That's why I bring in cash flow. So if you need help on building that strategy, you can always reach out to the team, admin at B.Invested.com.au, 1300 367 925. Happy to help out where we can on that front. All the best with your journey. You just need to make sure you choose the right adventure, the right vehicle to get you where you want to be. So on that note, guys, thanks a lot for tuning in, listening to us. You can find us every Thursday on Google Play, Apple Play, Spotify, and our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Beinvested. Thanks a lot for listening, guys. Catch up soon.
We're stuck in the matrix. This my advice, don't care if you take it. The dollar about to die, soon to be hyperinflated. This my 2 cents, don't care if you save it. Joint be decentralized and you will see you've been lied to the whole time, and it's the irony, cause they do the exact opposite. You become a slave to the system, enough your money, all they do is profit. There's no conspiracy theory, you better hear me. crypto will set you free before the system does. I don't care if you do or you don't, but what I'm saying is the truth to the reason you choke. I never been a failure, excuse my behavior. Keep talking, haters doing me a favor. They all tell lies, I know what they been telling you. I'm the opposite, the Donald Trump of Australia. It's amazing, here for the